Good morning. We're back for our second block of the month club. I hope you were able to see the one that we did last week. And today we're moving on to our next block. You're going to learn some more techniques today, but each time we learn something new, it will just give you more ammunition in your arsenal to continue. Excuse me, I had a funny note that came on. It will give you more knowledge to continue with your quilting skills. There comes a point when, yes, indeed, you have learned every technique there is, but then more advanced quilts will use those techniques and will blend techniques together. So really quilting is an ongoing learning experience. Now, last week I posted the information that you would need to download the pattern. Hang on just a second, I've got another weird message here. Apple wants me to buy something. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead, and this is just kind of going to, I guess, be in the middle of my screen, so I can't. Now it's going to report the message to Microsoft. I don't know. Computers are a challenge at any time. This is the pattern we're going to be working with today. It's called the broken window. And you see that it looks very complicated. Again, it is very simple. I'm going to teach you one new technique today. The other two techniques you learned last week. So even though it looks complicated at this time, we'll break it down and it will be just fine. Now this is 2/3 of the block completed. And again, you might go, that's a lot of little blocks. And it is a smaller pattern piece, but you've learned this technique, so it won't be anything new. So as you're working, these instructions are just wonderfully done. It's from a company that I'm a member of, and they send these patterns each month. We get a free one, and we can download them to make. So I hope that you've taken the time to do this. If not, you can do it when we're done. So you see that first they show the picture, and then they tell you right here how many blocks to cut of how many colors. Now again, this time, even though I'm not using the pinks and blues, I have cut the exact number of lights and mediums and darks that they called for. And cut your pieces, stack them up, and then you'll have them right there ready to go. You'll start to assemble, and when your stacks are finished, you're done assembling. This is the new block that you're going to learn today, and this block is used a lot in quilting. And what you do, you take your rectangle, a 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangle that I have cut, and I'm going to put this paper down now. And you cut your 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangle. Then you cut 2.5 inch squares of a different color. So now again, I needed to put a stitching line on. So you can see there's a little pencil line that goes across. That will be my stitching line. You want to make that triangle in your piece. And I have found if I want my pieces to look similar, so when it's assembled, it shows consistency, I take and I always start with my square on the same side of my rectangle. It doesn't matter which side you start from. This is the side. Let me switch this. I'm trying to work upside down. I start as I'm looking at it on the right side of the fabric, and I lay my square with my diagonal line that I've drawn on it on the right hand side. In just a second, you'll understand what I'm talking about and why I do that. So now I would take my sewing machine and I would run the center of my foot right along that pencil line. But I have found it works best, and you won't believe it, but even the width of a pencil mark will make a difference in the assembly of your piece and how nice and flat it lays. So I would run my stitching line just to the outside of the block, just not right on the line, just beside it toward the outside. So you're going to stitch, stitch, stitch. And then when you're done, you're going to, and let me just put this down now so you can see. When you're done, you're going to fold this fabric back along your stitching line. And if you have stitched it correctly, these corners should be exactly square against each other. So it should be even here. It should be even here. It's folded right along your stitching line. So then the next thing you'll do is you'll take your scissors and you're going to clip 1/4 of an inch away from that stitching line and get rid of that extra fabric. I have a friend that saves all these little corners, all these little bits and pieces, and she puts them in a pillowcase that she has assembled, and they end up as dog bedding for the Humane Society. So maybe you want to start doing something like that. I save mine for her because it takes a long time to get enough to do a mattress for a kennel. So there we go. Now you see here we have, this is the point that I was talking about and why you want to always do on the same, start from the same side. So now I have assembled, I've trimmed, and now I'm going to lay my other corner. This is why I do them all from the same side, because you'll go ahead, stitch, 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 and then when you turn your piece back, this little point will always overlap in the same direction. Now, your goal is to have, when you assemble the pieces, that when you do your 1/4 inch, that 1/4 inch will come right exactly at that point. I'll be honest, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's off just a little. I have assembled the pieces and ripped out and sewn back in until I finally get that little 1/4 of an inch right there. So that is how you assemble this block. Here we go. That's how you assemble this block. You've trimmed your edges down to 1/4 of an inch. You take it to the sewing machine and you lay it flat and you press it nice and flat. I have talked before about how important it is to press the fabric, the pieces flat. They just assemble so much nicer if you are working with nice flat seams. Here for an example, we'll go over these in just a minute. When I got my 1/2 inch my half square triangles done, I went right to the iron. I pressed everything nice and flat. And that way, when you go to put your seams together, they butt up easily against each other. It's like they can find themselves. They know that's where they're supposed to be. Again, I've used a neutral thread today. This is kind of blends in with my background, but also it's a nice color that it kind of blends in with the blue, it blends in with the background. You can't really keep changing threads all the time. You'll drive yourself absolutely crazy. I have before tried to do a, say if I have the darker color on the bottom, I put my bobbin thread on where that's going to be and a lighter thread on top. What you're going to find is dyes will change the width of the thread even just a little bit, and that might throw the tension off when you go to sew either the top or the bottom with pucker. So I just used a neutral color throughout, and you see it just blends with everything. If I pull my seams apart, you don't really see that neutral thread, it just blends right in. So a neutral thread is important. Now, the next, so now we have completed this page where we have rectangles with the squares on the ends, and we had two different colors. We had this blue for these four, and then we had, instead of the light pink, I used this pattern piece. Again, the colors blend together, so they make a nice contrast. So now we have completed that page of the handout. And this is just so much fun to have this handout. It's well written. You can see where you are. Now the top picture simply shows what it looks like. If you turn it over, you press it from the back, and then it gives a nice flat piece on the front. So the next thing you'll do, you are going to assemble your half square triangles. Now, if you remember from last time, what we did, and I've got a little sample here, we took and we did our square, and this is a 3-inch square, and then down the center, we drew a line diagonally down the center from corner to corner. And then when we did our stitching, we did 1/4 of an inch each side of that center line. Then we're able to take our scissors. We have that 1/4 of an inch done. We're able to take our scissors, cut down that center line. So now I've taken my 3-inch square. I've drawn the diagonal from corner to corner. I've stitched 1/4 of an inch from each side of that line. And now I've trimmed the two apart. Now when I open it, I have my half square triangle. Now for right now, I'm just going to finger press. And again, I'm going to really push on it and try and flatten it as much as I can. I just check the back to make sure that I have a nice, even, flat seam. So now I have finger pressed that half square triangle, and you notice that I press the seam allowance to the darker triangle. And I know I talked about before how sometimes if you have a dark fabric and you press it toward the light side, if the fabric is thin enough and light enough, you might see a shadow along that seam line. So I simply finger pressed it down. Even at this point, if you did not go to the iron, you still would be able to have that same effect where the edges could butt up against each other. And it was like they lock into place. They know where they're supposed to be. If you have a seam that you have not ironed or you have not finger pressed, sometimes when you go and try and butt them up against each other, they slip and slide because they don't hold each other in place. So now we've made a stack of these. We have 2 different colors again, and we have many more of the dark triangle than we do the light triangle. We have 4 of our, it's pink in the pattern. We have 4 of the mediums, and then we're going to have 12 of the blue and white, and see I did blue and white so it looks similar, of the blue and white half square triangles. So you make all of those and you put them in your little piles. Now it's time to start assembling the block. Now, this is where you're going to need to kind of stay on your toes, because at this point, when you do your corners, you're going to have to do the mirror image of the block. So here we see that we have assembled our half square triangles with the darks all in this bottom corner, the medium in this bottom corner. Then to do the other side, we have to flip it. So now you see the darks go in the opposite direction. And you have to do that flipping, or else you will not end up with this outcome. And you see right here, here were the ones I started with, and then here's my centerpiece, and then I flipped. And so now my darks are in the opposite direction. The first time I did this, oops, I forgot to flip. I did all four corners, and when I went to assemble it, it didn't work. So I had to take all those old stitches out and redo it. Now, once you have your corner block assembled, you can take and do them all the same, and you just rotate around, but you have to make sure that you do that flip when you go to put the quilt together. So now we have assembled our rectangles, and we have assembled our half square triangles, and now we're ready to start. And then we have assembled these into our corner pieces, and I have to make sure to do this. Are we? No, one more flip, and this would be here, and then a dark next to it. So I have assembled my four corners. I have assembled 4 units with the mediums, and this in the pattern that you download, this would be the blue, medium blue, and this is the pink. But I assembled these 4 units. So now I have 4 units of these rectangles. I have 4 units of these half square triangles. And now I start to put them together. So again, the pattern very, very plainly shows you how to lay it out. Lay out the block before you start to sew. It will just make it so much easier, and you won't have to take things apart and put things back in. If you work with your fabric too much, which I did on a couple of these blue ones, they're kind of sad on the edges start to fray out, and then that changes the size. This dark blue is actually a looser weave, so it ravels more quickly than the other fabrics do. So I might even at some point redo these blocks simply because it's raveled, and I'm not crazy about that raveling. So now we have our broken window block all laid out, ready to sew. So again, going back to the handout, wonderful handout. I think I've said that, but you know, I really do mean it. And now we have taken and assembled the block. This shows first we assembled this row, and then we assembled this row, and then we assembled this row. It works so much easier, and it makes more sense if you assemble it section by section, and then you connect the sections. That way you're working with 3 large pieces for this block, and you have to just run 2 finishing seams. Now on this particular block, they did it like as a memory quilt. So on the fabric that they did for their center, their fabric actually says something. I just did, again, this piece that I told you last week. I happened to pick up just because I thought it was attractive. And then it turned out that all the colors coordinated with the colors I was using. So voila, there we go. It makes a nice contrasting centerpiece. And I'm going to use that pattern in many of my centers for my blocks. I don't know if I mentioned last week, and I'll just go ahead and talk about this right now. When you buy a fabric, your fabric has numbers on the end of the bolt, lot numbers. On your receipt, when you pay for the fabrics, like let's say you paid at Joann's, you bought it at Joann's, on that printed receipt, the lot number will be printed. Hang on to that receipt. If you run low, like let's say I run low of my pattern fabric that I want for the middle, because in truth, I had not purchased enough ahead, thinking it would ever be into a quilt. I just liked it, so I purchased a couple yards. If I have that receipt with the lot numbers on and I run short, I could take it back to any Joann's. They could look at the lot number, they can punch it into the computer, and if there's any of that fabric anywhere in their stores, it will pop up and they can order you more of that fabric. When I was doing the dress for my son's wedding, it was a line that Joann's carried, a bridal line, and it had a satin, a brocade, let's see, a chiffon, couple of lace. Anyway, they were all the same color family. They all had the same color names. But I went to 4 different Joann's. None of them had the complete collection. And of course, I had decided on making each piece with one of these fabrics. So they were able to order in from other stores the type of fabric I needed because they had that lot number, and they could go back and they could easily find it because it was a collection they were carrying. I was sure that the color was going to be the same, and it worked out very well. But I had that lot number, and boy, that really helped out. Now here we see is where they have taken and they have flipped it over and they pressed the whole quilt. They pressed the last 2 seams. Before that, every seam had already been pressed, the last 2 seams. And because the seams were there and were pressed flat, the little seams butted up against each other and made a nice flow across. Now, if you ever get to a place on a quilt where there's many layers that all come together at that seam, and you've sewn it, and now you have this kind of glob of corners all together, you might at that point separate the little points and then press it flat like a little fan. And that way you're still going to get a nice flat seam at that joining point. And that does happen at times when you go to assemble. And here we have our finished block. And you see, we have our 4 corners that are the same. We just spun them around when we were putting them in place. We have our 4 rectangle pieces assembled to put in. And then all we had left was our center block. That's kind of the easiest, the center block. So there we would have our window pane block assembled. The rest of the pattern just talks about finishing. When this is finished, this is going to be a 12.5-inch block. When you are looking at patterns and you go through a book and you'll say 10-inch block, 12-inch block, that is talking about the size when it is finished and all of the seam allowances have been used up. On this block, when it is finished, it's going to be 12.5 inches square. That allows for a 1/4-inch seam allowance all the way around. And same if you had a 10-inch block, the finished block before it was assembled would be 10.5 inches square. Now this is just kind of fun, and this is in the back of that same pattern. Let's say you wanted to assemble an entire quilt just using the broken window design. It gives you ideas of how you might want to assemble that quilt. So this is a quilt that's assembled on point, and that means it's assembled like a triangle, like a triangle. And when the edges come together, they form another design. Let me go back. Here's one that they did a very busy pattern. They used a different pattern to fill in. This is all in this handout. This one is kind of clever, where they used the broken window pattern, and then they used this kind of Irish chain design next to it. And it does really resemble an Irish chain quilt, but then with very fancy squares added to it. A regular Irish chain would just be plain in the middle, but would have these lines that follow down. So when I was cutting my pieces, I have purchased, because I've done so much quilting through the years, I have quilting templates of every size you can imagine. So when I did my 2.5-inch squares, right there, 2.5 inches. And I just took and I traced around it 2.5 inches. I didn't have to figure on my seam allowance because it's already here on this template. So very, very easy to do. Then when I go to draw the line on the diagonal, I take a larger template, or I take a larger ruler, put it from corner to corner, down the center of that block, draw the diagonal line, and then I have my line to base my stitching from. Now, this is a 3.5-inch template, and my pattern called for 3-inch squares. So when I put it on my fabric, I simply had to put it so it would cut off that extra 1/2-inch seam allowance. So there's my 3-inch block. So the rulers are so helpful, and they're so easy to use. They have markings on them. They have 1/4-inch markings. They have 1/8-inch marking. Believe it or not, there are some quilts that you use like 1 7/8 inch block. So you do need all these little lines along here to get your 7/8. Quilting is like a big jigsaw puzzle, and it's a lot of fun. It's very good therapy because you really concentrate on it, and you can kind of let the rest of the world go away. So I hope that you have gained a lot from today's lesson. It's going to be on the library's Facebook page. If you have any questions at all about the quilting, you can email me at the library, and you would go to our website and you would just type in quilting at clinton.lib, lib.mi.us. And I will get back to you. I check those websites constantly. So I'll get back to you as soon as I can with a quilting question. For right now, I'm working all day Tuesdays, Friday evening, and Saturday. If you have something you need to bring in and ask, I would be so happy to help you figure out a problem or help you have an idea. I'm doing a trip to Joanne's, meeting you there, and we could look for colors together. I love to help people look for colors. It's just a very fun thing for me to do. So I hope you've learned a lot. The video will be posted. You can go back and you can review it. Download that pattern. That will just help you so much in the assembly of the quilt. It will just, this pattern is just step by step, and you can do it so easily. So I will see you next month. Remember, it is the second Tuesday of each month. Also, this evening at the library at 6 o'clock, if you would like to come in, I can help you personally at 6 o'clock this evening. We've set that time aside. So bring your questions, bring your materials, and if you have any kind of question, I will be so happy to help you take care of it. Or if you want me to go through the whole thing again tonight, I would be more than happy to. So have a great day quilting. The weather's supposed to be beautiful, and I'll see you next month.